Welcome back to another session of APC's Local Activist Training Webinars. Today, we're going to take a step up and we're going to start dealing with state legislative issues. And I hope that there are some state legislators in our audience that we can share this information with. And I hope that each of you, if you have some personal friends or personal acquaintances who are legislators, that you will share this webinar with them. You know, property rights are under siege at every level of government right now, and they have got to be protected because liberty will not be possible if we have not protected property rights. And today we're going to discuss a plan to do just that. The state legislators have much more power than they realize. They can block federal edicts and refuse to obey them. The Constitution, in its clearly written enumerations of powers, specifically state that what the federal government can do and what it cannot do, and all other decisions are up to the states. The 10th Amendment is what it's called. But one of the problems that we run into is that state legislators don't know that they have these sorts of powers. And so consequently, we're suffering from a massive overreach of government, and they are ignoring that overreach and not fighting back to it. What we want to do is set up means to take care of some of that. One of the problems that we have is that legislators who do understand this are most of the time in a minority. And how do they stand up? How do they fight back? What do they do? We've got kind of a plan to do that, and I am very, very honored to have with me today to discuss that State Representative from the state of Washington, Matt Shea. And Matt has been extremely effective, so effective that he has been attacked like Donald Trump, like no other in this country. And that's just an honor to him, I think, of how effective it's been. Matt, thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate it very much.
Tom, thanks for having me on, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing with American Policy Center. And the right for property rights, or the fight for property rights, is so important today, because without any property rights, and this is what the insidious plan is, without any property rights at all, we have no ability to create wealth and therefore no ability to fight back. And really, that's at the bottom line of all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing the siege grow with the movement to get rid of single-family home zoning and put these smart growth stack and packs in place. And now the attack on landlords. They're not allowed to charge rent. They're not even allowed to ask some people if they're able to afford the rent. And where that's going to lead is eventually they'll be out of business. And the bottom line is, the goal we know is coming, is that all homes, all places to live are going to be government housing. And
Tom, I don't know about you, but I love free America. I don't want to live in an apartment of 200 square feet where I kind of roll out of bed in the morning and hit the other wall. I don't think anybody wants to live in an environment like that.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about some things. Now, you started out a few years ago. You put together, correct me wherever I'm wrong here, but you put together a Liberty Coalition in your legislature there in Washington. And you had, how many members did you have to that?
We had several dozen, depending on the bill, and I'll get to why that matters here in a second.
Okay, all right. But what you did was you were focusing on putting together legislation that would cut the size, the cost, the reach, the power of government. And I was told, I believe, the first time you put in like 64 bills, all designed to do that. Got hearings on 44 of them, got 14 of them passed. Is that pretty close to accurate?
That's pretty close to accurate. And we were doing that every year. And a lot of people didn't believe it could be done by constitutional conservatives in a state like Washington. But let me tell you, if you can do it in Washington state, you can do it anywhere in the country.
Yeah, I know. Well, what we're looking at here, and I've discussed with you before, the idea that First of all, the first step is to do what you did, to set up that coalition. And you provided to me a pledge to ask the legislators to take on that, and we'll share that in a second. And what I discussed with you was the idea of what if legislators in that coalition could now reach, because you're a minority, you don't have the majority to really push things through. How do you make issues a major a goal, a movement that catches fire, not only in your state, but how do we move it on? And I was talking about the idea that what if these legislators would begin to network with legislators in the same position in other states. They're in a minority, but they want to move forward. And the example I used is, what if we got 10 states where legislators are doing this and put these liberty coalitions together? And then we begin to take some bills, and they all are promoting those bills at exactly the same time. They put them in the hopper to be considered, and then they go to the news media, hold a news conference at exactly the same time in each state. And meanwhile, we have helped train other activists to support them and help make these things happen. And that would become a movement to move forward. That's the basic idea.
It is a basic idea. We need to have organization and training so that when, it's not dependent on one leader when one leader gets attacked, right? And that eventually happens in these types of environments where you're coming up against a lot of money and a lot of power. You need to be ready for that. And a lot of times it's not about money or power that is the decisive factor. It's about organization, and it's about presenting your case in a way that the average person in the public is like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't want to live in an apartment. I don't want to have to worry about paying 10 times just to raise cattle on my land because it's my land and has been for generations. These are the kind of things that if you do the right preparation, a pound of sweat, okay, is an ounce of blood, as it were, right? You have less bloodshed on the battlefield of politics if you are prepared going into it. And so that's really the point behind some of the things that I'm about to share.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's talk about how do we begin to lay the groundwork and start to move forward on this.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and pull up this first slide here, and really, I think we need to start here that compromise is something that has been abused and misused over the years. And we've seen across the country, from the National Congress down to state legislatures, down even to county commissions and councils across this country, where we have to compromise on everything. And what that ends up meaning is it's a euphemism for selling the farm. In some cases, quite literally, selling the farm. And we don't need to do that anymore. Leadership is not about the ability to compromise. It's about the ability not to. It's about the ability to persuade people to come over to your point of view, join your side on that particular issue. It's also important to understand that we need to build coalitions around issues of principle. I like to tell this story quite frequently. We have an absolutely unashamed communist in the Washington State Legislature. He will tell you he's a communist. He's a card-carrying communist, literally. And he and I disagree on 98% of the issues. But on those two issues we agree on, we work together on those two issues. So you're not compromising your principle, but what you're doing is building a coalition around issues of principle, and that's the difference. I want to start with information. Where do we get information? First and foremost, I believe the New American Magazine is the premier intelligence digest on the Marxist and socialist movement in the United States. And that's really, when we're talking about anti-property rights, that's really what we're talking about, is this socialist push. And there's another group called Understanding the Threat, which I believe is the premier intelligence digest in regards to Sharia law, which is another attack on private property rights. And all of these really, as Tom, as you have made a household word, are part of Agenda 21 or a globalist move, and now Agenda 2030, thanks to your work, and hopefully Agenda 2045 here soon. It is being pushed back because of what we're doing here, but it is a globalist push all the way down to the local level to essentially eviscerate private property rights and control every aspect of our lives. So number one, what we need to do is create a movement. I'm going to get to that here in a second. Number two, create a local machine. And number three, become the media. And what does that mean? Let's talk about creating a movement. Every movement, and I base this loosely on what William Wilberforce did in England to abolish slavery in England. This can be used in any movement, but you need really 5 types of people. You need a legislator, or somebody that's going to champion and carry the cause. This is somebody that is going to be unafraid to be attacked in the media. And Tom, like you and I have been attacked in the international media. You can't be afraid for that to happen. This is also somebody that can articulate the reasons and charge forward. So it really does need to be somebody that is a decent public speaker and doesn't look like they just came out of, a mill after a hard day's work when they're presenting these things. And maybe they do work in a mill during the day, but presentation is so important. And so this has to be somebody that fits that mold. The next is the agitator. And this is kind of interesting because agitators really have a bad rap in America. These are the people that rattle the cages. And we all have this kind of idea and picture in our head of that person that rattles the cages. We shouldn't look down on those folks because they help keep issues in the foreground. But what we should do is help them channel their energy toward the most effective means of bringing these things up that are going to be received the best by the broadest possible audience. The next is the poster child. This is somebody like the rancher that we had up here who was facing their property being stolen here just outside of Spokane, Washington. Had a great story. Lifelong ranchers, generational ranchers, just like my family's been 4 generations in Washington State, helped homestead Washington State. And now, because of some bureaucrats, they're going to lose their livelihood, their future for their children. So this poster child needs to fit that mold as well of being presentable to the broadest possible audience. Next, you have the strategist. This is the person that harnesses and prioritizes ideas. They rein in and guide and direct the agitator, and oftentimes the legislator as well. And that's really where an attorney is very good. If you can have an attorney on your team that is not afraid of their own shadow and is willing to actually move forward, that's the kind of strategist you want. Somebody that's willing to take calculated risks, willing to step out, and willing to really fight on every front possible against the people that are trying to destroy property rights. And then lastly, you have the wise sage. This is somebody that usually has the crown of wisdom or gray hair on their head, and they bring wisdom and credibility to the movement. They've been around a long time. They're very well respected in the community. So those are kind of the basic things to start a movement. The next thing you need is structure. We need, in all the movements that we do locally, we need vision. What do we want this to look like when it's all done? Quite often, and Tom, I know you have run into this, where you have people in for that one issue and then bam, they're gone. When you win on that one issue, they're gone, instead of being in for the full vision. In other words, we want to see a restored, God-honoring constitutional republic. That's our vision. It's a restored republic. We want to see those principles restored. So it's really painting a picture for everybody. What do we want this to look like when it's done? It's not just one issue, it's the whole picture. The next is the mission. It's the who, what, when, where, and why that supports that vision. And that's pretty self-explanatory, but it's important not to get distracted with side issues. That you always have folks in a movement that are trying to distract from the main issue. Keep the main thing the main thing. Then you have your objectives. These are specific milestones to accomplish your mission. So for example, Washington State, one of the specific milestones was creating this coalition of legislators around issues of principle. One of the second milestones was to introduce over 50 bills. We wanted to get over 50 bills that would attack every part of the law and bring it back into conformity with the Constitution. And we were able to put a number on that. And then also a milestone was how many hearings. We wanted to at least have 15 to 25% of our bills heard. Even in a minority, that is a very ambitious goal, but it is a specific milestone that you know when you've accomplished it. And then also we wanted to have milestones on the bills that we actually got passed and signed into law. So the next part of this is strategies. And a lot of times people will confuse strategies and tactics. The first with strategies, these are the ideas, the principles behind your movement and the plan to get the mission done. What do I mean by ideas and principles? There's some basic ideas behind private property rights. First of all, that we actually have private property rights and our property isn't owned by a collective, but that if we actually have individual ownership of things, it actually creates the most prosperous society. It creates the most wealth. It creates the most ability to give and help other people who are not as well off. And especially in other countries, it's one of the hallmarks of the greatness of the United States of America. Other principles that are along with this, one of the principles is that property rights is fundamental to liberty. In other words, if you don't have private property, you really can't have liberty. Another principle is that without private property rights, you don't have a true free market and a food supply chain that is robust and resilient. So these are some of the ideas and principles that you want to set forth when you're talking about your strategies for your movement. The next is tactics. This is the specific how-to and use of what to get the mission done. The specific how-to can differ from community to community. For example, down in Louisiana, there's a little bit different governing style under the Napoleonic Code that requires a different approach to certain things, whereas up here in Washington State, where our county commissioners hold quite a bit of power, we can actually show up to their offices, we can talk to them personally, we can develop relationships a little bit easier, and we have maybe a little bit of a different approach. So those tactics have to take into account what the reality is on the ground in your particular state. And a lot of people will ask, well, how can you possibly go against the socialists? Well, it's really interesting. Socialists will always try to seize the property of other socialists. And when that happens, the person having their property seized no longer wants to be a socialist. So you can actually bring them in, identify it ahead of time, just as an example of a specific how-to. And I'm sure, Tom, we'll talk about that here a little bit in a moment. We want to talk about some specific lessons learned through some of the movements that we built here in Washington State. First, it's important to use images, t-shirts, slogans, buttons, those kind of things, bumper stickers. One of our recent things is freedom is the cure. It is the cure. It's the cure for virtually all that ails us in this country. So think of using images as an important part of the movement. The second is to always be grounded, be moral, competent, and professional in everything that you do, no matter what that is, in creating these coalitions and moving forward with the bills that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. Also, in sadly in our culture, emotions often trump facts now. So use stories. The personal stories of the ranchers losing everything, the farmers losing everything, and where they've held a farm for generations, and all because of some wayward bureaucrat that's acting in an unconstitutional and a tyrannical manner. Use those stories. It galvanizes people. Our communities are a lot smaller than we think they are. Also, corruption. Understand that corruption is very real. And Tom, I know you've run into it. I've run into it quite a bit. It is very real. It's as straight as the two lines in the road. Whether we're talking food and money or hobbies or sex or smearing people, corruption is real. Plan for it, be prepared for it, so when it happens, it's not a true surprise to you that somebody is trying to corrupt you to get you off the track of your movement. Persuasion and negotiation are an art form. And when I talk about legislators, particularly and the strategists in the movement, they need to know how to do this well. We need to be able to persuade people to our point of view, but also to negotiate and get the ball forward, even if we don't get everything. I think this is such a critical lesson to learn. It doesn't mean we're compromising in the other direction. That's wrong always. But what it does mean is that we are moving the ball forward and getting as much as we can. And we'll go over some of those specific stories here in a bit. Also, don't be fooled. This is a full contact sport. You're going to take hits. You're going to get the media yelling at you. You're going to be put on the front page. Okay, I would rather that happen and live in a free country that I can leave to my children and grandchildren than not. So get over that ahead of time. And lastly, there is joy in the journey, and truly there is, especially seeing so many lives changed and so many areas of the country changed and so many people waking up now. That is because of the long, hard work of a lot of people like you, Tom, over the years sowing those seeds. I want to talk about the local machine. Identify people to do your social media. Identify people to do a war room. Identify who your allies are. Chart out where your support is on a map. Identify people that can do your printing and graphic design and web stuff ahead of time, because what happens is in a lot of these times, a lot of these situations is you will face the brunt of the attack, but then they start going after all the folks that are trying to help you. So identify all those folks ahead of time. Another thing that I think is extremely important is be independent, completely independent from any political party. We have seen Republicans just as bad as Democrats on some of these issues. So don't let that try to sway you away from the principle that private property rights is key to our free republic. Establish vetting committees to vet the experience of the people that you're bringing into the movement. Make sure that you're not bringing people in that might cause you problems later. Do annual events. Do an annual fundraiser for your movement in that particular area, not just to raise money, but also to bring people together and to honor people that have been working behind the scenes and very rarely receive thanks. Give something for people to rally around. Here in Washington State, we have a Liberty State movement. We have flags. People can rally around flags, and it's really galvanized folks against what's happening on the west side of the state in the urban areas. So give folks something to rally around. Don't just presume people are going to rally to your cause because it's a righteous cause. Give them something to rally around. And I've already talked about creating coalitions around issues of principle, but do a regular war room. See where you're at. See where you're going, how far you have to get there. And then lastly, I would talk about becoming the media. Question the mainstream media and make them defend their positions. A lot of times in these property rights issues, as you come into these, you will see the mainstream media begin to attack you. Question them and make them defend their positions. Did they agree that the farmer should lose his livelihood that's been there for generations? Do they believe that an out of control, unelected, unaccountable bureaucrat should have that kind of power? Make them defend their untenable positions. Use a technique called man on the street reporting. A lot of technology exists today where you can just plug a microphone into your iPhone and become a man on the street or woman on the street and questioning people on what they believe. Do you know about the rancher losing their farm? Do you know about the idea of the city to create apartments in the downtown area? A lot of people don't. It's a great thing. Also use regular videos, and if you can, do a regular radio show and podcast. Very, very effective at getting your message out when we're in a time of censorship. Also, use multiple social media platforms. I like Parler in addition to using Twitter and Facebook in case Facebook decides to censor. We still have another one. There's Gab and MeWe and a bunch of others that are out there. But use multiple social media platforms for your movement. Also, use encrypted technology. You can text using apps like Signal and Telegram. You can email using Proton Mail and communicate in these encrypted fashions for several reasons. One, a lot of these things are monitored, and two, they're monitored by people that are anti-property rights. So don't give them anything free. Protect your messaging and protect your people. And then lastly, try to start a local news site, an online news site. And remember that when you're doing this, think of three things: personalize the issue, popularize the issue, and polarize the issue. Now, that's not polarization in the bad sense. It's polarization in the right and wrong sense. It is wrong to steal a family's property. It is wrong to shut down a business for arbitrary reasons. That's what I mean by polarize. So personalize, popularize, polarize, and get that out on your own local news site. And with that, Tom, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and we can maybe start talking a little bit about some specifics with bills and some of these other things. But that really is how we create a movement. It's how we go forward, and it is how we can do it in a competent fashion that isn't for just one issue, but is for generations and can be added on as needed based on how your local elected officials are trying to act.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Matt. Those are wonderful suggestions. Several of them we're focusing on as well to teach these through this whole series. And let me just say a couple things. You talked about the vetting people in there. I have heard many cases of where somebody starts a movement and it begins to become successful, and all of a sudden they get a knock on the door, and somebody standing there saying, "I can help you. I can get this, move forward in the powers that be," and so forth. And people begin to trust them. And before they know it, the movement that they started has no resemblance to what they intended to do. And so, yeah, that's very much, they will do that. They will come right into your camp and try to take control of it.
Well, let's be really blunt. I mean, there are actually professional provocateurs out there that attempt to come into movements that they know are going to be successful and try to blow them up from the inception, and divide it and send people in a different direction so that the movement will never be able to recover. Just know ahead of time that you want to be very cognizant of the person that suddenly comes up to you that you don't know, that has never been involved before. And that's not to say, because a lot of times people want to be involved, all of a sudden it's striking a chord with them. But there's a certain type of person, and they will come in right at the wrong moment, and you want to be really, really sensitive to that. Thank you for bringing that back up, Tom.
Yeah. By the way, I had somebody tell me a few years ago that if you're starting a movement, the first thing you should do is write down what your goals are, what your whole purpose is, and have that on paper. So that if this happens, then, and you recognize it, and you know this person is doing this to your movement, you can now bring out that paper and say, look, this is what we started out with, and he's taking us this way. And so that was one thing to do. The other thing I wanted to mention is, as we're fighting these battles, as you mentioned, people will come in and fight, and then all of a sudden they disappear and they're not there. One of the things I run into all the time is they'll go down to a big meeting at City Hall or something, and they don't succeed. And they come home and they say, well, it doesn't work. It didn't, nothing happened, nothing changed. My question always comes out, what did you do the next day? Well, nothing, because it didn't work. You have got to look at small victories as victories. They are all a step in the right direction. The left put their plan together. They started out with their slogan of think globally, act locally. They know exactly what they were doing, and they have done it magnificently. There is no small position that they ignore. They get their person in there, and they take, if they only get a compromise of a 2%, that's 2% they didn't have yesterday, and they keep moving that way. And what we're seeing now, the COVID thing is, and the whole Black Lives Matter and everything is showing beautifully the preparation that they have done, and the way they're moving their whole goal forward with even the smallest position in the community government is amazing. And we ignore that and think, well, we got to be the mayor, it doesn't matter, that kind of thing.
Well, I want to go a little bit deeper on that. In my legislative district here in the 4th in Spokane Valley, Washington, there are over 52 elected positions. Every single one of those elected positions, every single one of them affects property rights. We have water districts, we have sewer districts, we have cemetery districts, all of which are taxing districts, all of which can encroach on property from time to time. We have school districts, we've got city councils, those are more known, but those lesser positions, and they're really not lesser, but most people think of them that way, they have a profound effect on property rights. And I always tell the story of one lady. She was so fed up with tax increases in her cemetery district that she ran against a long-time incumbent, and yes, they have those in cemetery districts as well, and doorbelled 600 homes, beat that incumbent, and was the deciding vote to block a tax increase the very next election cycle, or the very next meeting cycle. So, and these are the kind of profound effects that we can have if we get involved.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's move forward then with the the plans how to organize. I'm particularly interested with legislators because, as we said, there's a lot of power there. We could stop a lot of what the federal government's doing. So many people want to start fighting. They want to work on the presidential campaign. They want to work on the bigger races, and they ignore the smaller ones and even the influence that the legislature has. And this is a place where we could put a big stop to all of it. So I want to move forward with that.
Absolutely. So how do we get organized? Well, like I said, build coalitions around issues of principle, set up the media, do that. But what can we actually do at maybe the state legislative level or at the county level? And I want to kind of get into that. So Tom, if you want to start, I don't know if you want to go down the bill list or not, but we can just kind of share some ideas here.
Yeah. Well, first of all, as we've been advocating throughout the previous webinars we've been doing with this, that I've been advocating the idea of creating your community into a freedom pod. That a freedom pod is to protect free enterprise, private property, freedom of choice. And anything that interferes with that, those are things that we need to stand up to and to fight back. And I believe that if you succeed in your own community doing that, then it'll move next door to the next community and to the next one, and eventually it moves into the legislature. And if it begins to move throughout legislatures, then it'll move up to Congress and to the national level. But meanwhile, we've got to do this on the local level. And so what you have given me is we've talked about, the private property rights are so vitally important that if you don't have your own property to stand on, how do you declare your positions, your freedoms? And this is where we're headed. The private property, they understand this. They understand that private property must be done away with in order for them to completely control our whole lifestyle. So you provided to me, first of all, as I mentioned at the beginning, the idea of putting together this Liberty Coalition in your legislature, so you have a cadre of people who are already on board to move forward, doing all the other things that you've talked about, begin to put the message together. Probably every one of those people has a special talent. You've probably learned that maybe they're best at, and put those talents to place. You begin to organize it in your own situation. Now, you gave me a pledge, a freedom pledge, to have the legislators take to join your Freedom Coalition. Do you want me to read it, or?
Yeah, I think it's great. Yeah.
Okay. It says, "I solemnly pledge to my constituents that I will consistently vote to defund or vote against appropriating money for any state participating in the implementation or enforcement of any federal regulatory program or activity not specifically authorized by the enumerated power of the United States Constitution, because when such programs are actively or activity is not specifically authorized by an enumerated power, it is not allowed under the United States Constitution. For any state participation, I do vote to fund. I will provide the specific enumerated power constitutionally permitting it." You're going to tell why you have the right to do this as you move forward. Yeah.
Too often legislators, county commissioners, will say, "Oh, it's constitutional." Where? Show me where. And I have run into probably in 8 out of 10 cases where they cannot show you where. And if they do show you, it's some vague provision that they really don't even understand, doesn't apply to what they're talking about. So I think that this is so critical to do that we are putting government back into its constitutionally designed box.
Absolutely. And one of the things I'd like to bring out too is we're talking about these tactics, what we're doing. We're talking about on a state legislative level, but some of these tactics you can actually use on the county and on the city level as well, putting a freedom coalition together. You've got a council of 5 people, maybe there's 2 of you, and you can get some other people in the government to join you as well. And so we can, keep that in mind, that this is not just state legislative, but it can go, at any level. So, yeah. All right, well, let's talk about, first of all, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the idea of putting this Freedom Coalition together in your legislature, and we just read the pledge that they would take, that they're going to stand for the Constitution, essentially. And as we mentioned, as you put this together, 64 bills the first time, each one of them designed to cut the size, cost, power, reach of government. And, and you got here, and it was very clear. You said to me, don't do it all in one bill, put it in a series of bills. So if you get one passed, that's a victory.
It's a victory.
And and then you got hearings on them, and the hearings open it up, get the conversation going, and then you got some of them passed.
And during those hearings, make sure you got people coming in and sharing their stories, and I mean the gut-wrenching stories on camera, on the record. It's super important, and it doesn't matter if it's the county level or the state level. If you do that, they can't take that away because it's officially on the record.
Yeah, and we've got to have those activists on the ground doing that, and it can be activists that are attending, activists that are doing research and putting things out, as you mentioned, putting our own kind of media together. We've got a network of conservative radio shows across the country. Some are national, some are local, and if we begin to organize with them, and they're ready to put the message out at the same time, maybe have some of the legislators on to discuss it as guests and that sort of thing, you begin to build a groundswell of support and understanding of what you're doing.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So, yeah. So then we start this in your own state. Now, you're a minority from the full legislature, and you want to have some power. So you start reaching out to some legislators in the neighboring state that have the same ideas, the same position, and the same problem. And we've got a legislative thing we're going to go through here in a minute. Share that with them. Say, here's some things we could do. And they begin to make the pledge. They begin to organize their own group. And you do it in another state and another state. Say you get 10 states in your immediate, surrounding area to do this. And then you take these bills and you introduce them at the same time, exactly the same day, in every single state, and you hold a news conference. Each coalition holds a news conference in their states at exactly the same time. Here is what we're doing, and here is why. And and we have these activists ready to begin to, raise a ruckus as well as that's done to support it. And the idea is that you've made a lot of noise all over. And I've used the same example for cattlemen who are being under siege by the World Wildlife Fund and so forth, and their beef roundtable and so forth, the Sustainable Beef Roundtable. And I've said, have a cattle drive down Main Street to the state legislature to make your position, but do it in 10 states at the same time. You will get international coverage if you do that. Otherwise, you'll be ignored. And that's the point. We've got to make it a movement. We've got to change the debate. And this is creating a groundswell to do that.
One of the things that we discovered was that the socialists particularly would introduce legislation in Washington State, California, and they would introduce the exact same legislation. I mean, verbatim, same wording. And so we could take the arguments that were successful, the stories that were successful in one state, and move them to the next state to fight against this. And then eventually they would try it in Idaho. And Idaho would be totally ready by that time because it would be a couple years down the road. And so it was really good on the defensive side. On the offensive side, as you just mentioned, Tom, when you introduce the bills that are moving the ball forward all at the same time, it actually scares them because they don't think we're that organized.
Exactly.
To do about it. And usually they will start taking steps backward. and they will say, okay, we didn't mean it the way you think we mean it, and we're willing to negotiate, right? They always say use those kind of euphemisms. So anyway, I think that the point is there's a defensive part of this and an offensive part of it, and both work very, very well, and you can coordinate very quickly across state lines. And you only need 2 to half a dozen legislators in each state communicating for that to be extremely effective.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go over what some of these bills are, because as we said, we're really focusing on property rights with them, and for the most part, and we can do other things as well. And what we're going to go through here very quickly, we have in our manual and in our toolkit that I'll talk about later about how this is going to be promoted or presented to people. But so we have these that people can use, and they can. I mean, these are bills that you provided. They can change them to their situation if they need to, and whatever works. But I just kind of put a title on each one. We've got a package of 5 bills. And as you very rightly said, I mentioned earlier, that you don't try to put all these in one bill. Put them in 5, or put them in a package and separately. But the first one that we had was block international laws, block international law over the Constitution. And so you want to talk about these individually?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, Agenda 21. I had a reporter come up to me one time and say, "Do you believe Agenda 21?" And I said, "Do you mean the 300-page, 30-chapter document entitled the UN Agenda for the 21st Century? Yeah, it's a real document. Are you saying that doesn't exist?" They didn't know what to say to me, right? The fact of the matter is they took that and they put it down to the local level. And so international law, quite literally, is being implemented at our local levels, and we can stop that if you can recognize it. And so that's what the purpose of that bill is, to call attention to the fact that there are a lot of things that are really antithetical to the United States that are actually anti-U.S. that they're trying to pass at the local level, and we need to stop that at the local and state level.
Yeah, that's how they're implementing it. And what I point out many times, one of the things they'll always say to me is that Agenda 21 has no enforcement capability. It's just a suggestion. And of course, my favorite line is, "There are no blue helmeted troops at City Hall. You silly boy." Well, what I've been pointing out is the President's Council on Sustainable Development under Bill Clinton. The purpose of this council was to take the suggestion of Agenda 21 and make it a national policy, and through every agency. And that's exactly what they did. And now it's trickling down to the states and into those communities.
If they are just suggestions, then why are you making the suggestion, number one? And number two, why are you trying to implement an enforcement mechanism for just a suggestion? And there's no answer to that. They can't answer that. This is not just a suggestion, obviously, and we need to stop it at the local and state level.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the second bill is stop, I can't read my own writing here. Stop eminent domain for economic development is the other one, eminent domain.
Yes, this is essentially overturning the probably one of the worst Supreme Court decisions of the last half century, the Kelo decision, which essentially said that they could seize one person's property, not to build a road or a hospital or something. They could seize the property and then give it to another private party so that it could be economically developed. That means there is no private property. That means that the government can seize anything they want to at any time. So this overturns that again, and also brings up the fact that this exists. A lot of people don't even know that this exists, and it happens all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. The third one, if the government takes it, the government pays for it.
Yeah, so a lot of these bureaucratic decrees, now a lot of people are now seeing it happen to them personally with this whole mask debacle and all this other stuff going on, this pandemic. They're seeing this happen to them personally now. But bureaucratic decrees always have an economic impact. And so these unelected bureaucrats will add conditions of use, et cetera, on people's property and cost thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars So if they're going to do that, that is a taking from that person, and therefore they should be compensated as such. To date, in a lot of areas, bureaucrats just run roughshod and say you have to put up a fence where one isn't really needed, or you have to do this extra thing with your property that's not really needed, cost thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, and this bill is designed to stop that.
Yeah, the real problem as they put all these things in place, everything under sustainable development is one size fits all. Does
Right.
not take into consideration your own personal situation. And, so they start dictating what color your door can be, and, what you have to have a permit for everything. And this is what comes out. That's not private property ownership when they have that.
Yeah, I'll give you one example. There's a guy that owns an auto body shop that I know, and he had his paint booth. He said, Matt, do you know how many agencies regulate just my paint booth? I was like, I don't know, 5. And he said, oh, no. It's like 10 plus regulate my paint booth, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And so if government's going to do something that's going to cost you, they should pay for it the way that it was intended in the Constitution by the founders.
Absolutely. The fourth one is no developer entry onto your property without the property owner's permission.
That's right. It's an omnibus trespass bill, where we ran into the Wildland Urban Interface Code. They've been trying to push all over the country, and they do it adoption by reference. So to be a one-page bill, just have a reference there, and so we adopt by reference. Well, if you go read the code, it allows agencies, I'm talking bureaucrats, to come onto your property, other people to come onto your property without any notice, without your consent, and just start walking around. Well, in rural Washington, if you do that, it's actually hazardous to your health. And as it is in other areas of the Western United States, and I'm sure rural Eastern United States, but this is not what the founders intended, that your property was sacrosanct. People weren't supposed to come on there unless there was a reason justified under the Constitution. And really the only time that is if there was an articulable warrant that said, here are the places to be searched and here's the probable cause, now we can come on your property. It wasn't just any bureaucrat thinking that they could go catalog the number of turtles and plant life on your property and then hold it against you that your property is now some sort of special species land that needs to be protected. And that is what's happened in the West. People have come on to, these bureaucrats have come onto people's property and then tried to say it's now critical habitat and shut that property down.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what people will say about this kind of a bill is that, you can't stop them from doing that because they'll bring a drone on and take care of it now. We have a bill for that.
We do.
How to stop them, from bringing drones over your private property without your permission again.
That's exactly right. So I'll tell a short story. I was in Governor Inslee, who's now infamous across the country. I was in his office, and we had this bill on his desk, and he said, but Matt, we want to be able to fly drones over farms and ranches and over the bulkheads so that we can fine them for violating the environmental rules. And I said, Governor, that's the whole point behind the bill. We don't want you doing that. And he said, but I want to do that. And it was just like, it was literally this conversation, and this is the whole point. There should be probable cause. If you can imagine a drone flying over your trucking company, finding you for oil spills that have been found at 3,000 feet. I mean, that's just insane. And I don't think that was the intent of the founding fathers. I know it wasn't. And so this bill says that it doesn't matter how you are viewing into the property, there still needs to be probable cause. There still needs to be the Constitution enforced.
Yeah. So you take these 5 bills, each one of them addressing certain pieces and parts of the attack on private property and on liberty. And okay, so we get 1 or 2 of them passed. You have now bolstered private property. You have now had hearings, you have had news conferences, and you have made each one of these things an issue. And in each case of all that is a victory, because you have now stood up and talked about it. And and even telling your story about Inslee, would be a very effective thing to do. And people say, yeah, I'm gonna support that bill. And so, yeah, this is the package that we have put together here, and I thank you very much for providing it.
Absolutely. And again, this isn't just in the state legislature. You could take this stuff and you could pass county ordinances if you wanted to do that as well. So don't just kind of pigeonhole it at the state level. This can be used locally as well. And Tom, again, thank you for having me on today.
I deeply appreciate it, Matt. I have such respect for you and what you've done and what you've accomplished and what you've gone through. And so I'm happy you took the time. And we're doing a series of these webinars and teaching in building blocks. And this is a major building block for legislators as well as city councilmen and county commissioners. So we will move forward and begin to get these things out and get people doing these things. So thank you so much.
Well, blessings to you, Tom, and everybody out there. Keep up the fight. That's what we need to do. We need to persevere. That's how we're going to pass freedom on to the next generation.
That's exactly right. Thank you, Matt. Hi, this is Tom DeWeese from the American Policy Center. And I want to tell you about the full program that we are putting together as we put these webinars together. The webinars are the first part of what we are working on to help local activists become citizen ninjas, become powerful to fight on the local level, to stand up to things and these policies and your city councils and your county commissions, and effectively push back on the things that they're putting together. And we're putting together the series of webinars. And one of the things you can do with these webinars is keep them. They'll be available on our website at americanpolicy.org. You can share them with others. You can watch them over and over again. You can use them as programs for organizations that you're already part of and begin a training process there. We've got to get a cadre of trained activists to stand up to the forces that we are up against. What we're facing, you can see by watching your television every night now, what we are up against an opposition that is highly trained to absolutely destroy the Republic of the United States of America, your property rights, your ability to live your life as you choose. And what we are doing here is working to counter that effort that they are putting together and begin to restore our liberties. And again, the webinars are the first part of that. And the second thing that we've done is we've put together this activist handbook to how to fight back on the local level. In fact, the webinars are basically designed to bring this to life. Let me just share with you some of the things that are in this manual. I don't think anybody has ever put together a more comprehensive tool for you to use in these cases. First of all, we've got a great deal of information in here about the real enemy that you're facing. The Green New Deal, the Agenda 21, sustainable development policies that are taking over every single community. And I know if you've been an activist, you've gone to try to talk to your city councilman and so forth, and they'll tell you, I've never heard of it, don't know what that is, tell me something about it, whatever. Well, we've got all the details here of why it's bad news. And one of the things we're focusing on in the manual is how to take the offensive for liberty, and how to create your community as a freedom pod where you are in your community alone. You are fighting back to restore and protect private property, free enterprise, and your personal freedom of choice. Those are the American pillars of freedom that we've all enjoyed through the history of the United States that are now under attack. We're teaching you how to fight back with those things. Particularly, we're focusing on the local governments. Everybody wants to get involved in the presidential campaigns and work with Congress or whatever, but we believe that the most effective thing you can do to fight back is start on the local level, and it will grow up to the state legislature and then on into Congress and so forth. But it rarely works the other way, and we focus on that in the manual. We're going to talk about some of the organizations, the NGO organizations that are in your communities and how they operate. The National Association of Realtors, and how they have absolutely betrayed the whole issue of property rights, which they ought to be the leading advocate for, the American Planning Association, and how they've taken over every single community in this country and putting in plans. They say free enterprise doesn't work, so they have to have their planning. That should give you a real hint as to what their planning is really about, but they call it smart growth. They're destroying private property ownership, and so forth. We're going to talk about how to take legislative action. And we have put together a package of 5 bills that are all designed to cut back on the size, cost, growth, reach of government that is particularly on private property rights. And we're going to teach you and legislators how to use these bills in legislators and start a movement across the country. We're going to go into great detail about that. Taking the offense to restore our liberty is what this is all about, and how to become a citizen ninja. We've got 8 rules for successful activists to follow, what those are, how to organize, how to research. We've got in here a city survey. If you take this document and fill it out, a city survey on your community, and you will find what kind of programs you have there, who's involved, what they are. Once you get this whole document filled out, you'll know everything you need to know about your city and how to begin to fight back. It's a very, very valuable tool, and it's in the manual. How to write effective letters to the editor, and how to use the media, not just newspapers and television and radio, but also social media, and how we need to use those things and organize and get your message out. We have some tools in here that are extremely effective, and a lot of them are used to call out your elected officials. Do they stand for free enterprise, private property, and limited government, or are they promoting these massive government programs? We have some resolutions asking them to sign, whether they do or not, and if they don't sign, you've got your answer. We've got a pledge for elected officials and candidates to sign. Guys running for office, and he says, "Oh yeah, I'm with you." Well, here's a resolution for him, a pledge for him to sign, saying that he supports private property rights. Now, if he signs it, wonderful. And if he starts to betray that when he gets into office, you've got that document in hand to say, "Hey, what are you doing here? This is what you said you believed in when we elected you." These kind of things. We've got a whole lot of handouts that you can produce and hand out to people on various issues, conservation easements and other attacks on private property. And wherever it fits your need, we can have that there. And we have a section in the manual talking about how to take back the elective process, how to get into your precinct organization. And, if you organized your own precinct, you could become a very powerful person in your community. Elected officials or candidates would come to you, say, "Help me." And you could say, "Where do you stand? What do you stand for?" That'll determine whether I help you or not. This is in the manual. One of the big things that I've been working on for the last year and a half is a means to make elected officials personally responsible for their own actions. How do you do that? There are some legal actions that can be taken. We now have a couple of them that one of them has to deal with the 14th Amendment. One of them has to deal with the Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. We're going to have webinars on this, and we're going to teach you, and it's in the manual as well, how to deal with these things. And then we have just a whole lot of documents. Do you know what the Wildlands Project is? We've got a document in here that'll tell you what it is. It's how they're taking rural land. Do you know what complete streets are? We've got a document in here that'll tell you what that is. And international building codes, controls on urban growth, the AFFH bill from HUD, Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, which, by the way, the Trump administration has now said they're going to take away, but the National Association of Realtors says, well, we'll pick up the ball and take that instead. That, again, shows you their betrayal. National heritage areas and so forth. All of these are documents and much, much more in this manual that we have now put together. and it's all available for you on, I'll tell you what, the manual itself now is ready on Amazon and on our website at americanpolicy.org, and it is $49.99 to just buy it outright. However, a lot of these programs, a lot of these documents, a lot of the research documents that are just too big to put into this document, we now have those. We have on our website called a toolkit, and that toolkit has a lot of these documents. It has also where in the manual we do have some of these handouts that you can use, but it's kind of hard to get them out of the book, so you can download them from the website. And all of these kinds of documents and more, we're getting ready to put together some another section on the website where we can document the activists in different communities and actions they've taken successfully or not, sample legislation, all that sort of thing. And by the way, in here we have a kit of 5 bills that have been presented to us, provided for us by State Legislator Matt Shea in Washington State, that all focus on limiting government and protecting private property. And those are downloadable on the toolkit on the website. So it's all in there together. And what we're asking with all of these details, you know, about a year or 2 years ago, I put out a 5-point action plan of how to restore all this. The webinars are the first part of that action plan. The website is another part that, as we're putting it together, and as that is being developed. And we're working on, and again, putting these media sources together, as I mentioned, the radio shows, things like that. Those are all part of that action plan. Well, you know, it takes some funds to put all these things together. So what we're asking is, you can get the manual for just $49.99 on Amazon, or for a donation of at least $100, you can have access to everything, the manual itself and the toolkit, and all the updates that we give as they come along, and lots and lots of other information that will be coming down the pike as we do that. You will be part of the team. Just a donation, a one-time donation of $100, and you'll have access to all of that. So our goal is to restore the Republic of the United States of America and all the freedoms that we were guaranteed to be protected in our Constitution. That is our goal. We are up against a massive force, as you know, but we can beat them. And they are terrified that you're going to learn the information that we're providing here. And the last thing they want is for you to know this information. So get the information, become a powerful citizen ninja in your own community, how to organize, how to fight back, all the details, everything you need, all of it comes together. If you can see your way to give us a donation of at least $100 one time, then you will have access to all of it. So I hope you'll do that. I hope you'll join us, and let's take America back. Thank you.